during the time when the judges were in charge. There was a great shortage of food in Israel that caused them to move to a foreign country called Moab. Elimelech and Naomi raised 2 sons, and when their sons grew up, they each married women from Moab. Sadly, Naomi's husband and 2 sons died, and Naomi was left alone with her 2 daughter-in-laws. She told them that she was going to move back to Israel, and that they should return to their own families. But one of the women, Ruth, refused to leave Naomi. She said, "Wherever you go, I will go. Your people will be my people, and your God will be my God." So Naomi and Ruth moved back to Israel to begin a new life. One day, Ruth went to a field to pick up the grain that the farmers had left behind. Little did she know that the owner of the field was Boaz, a relative of Naomi. Boaz was kind to her and offered her to come find food whenever she wanted. Naomi was getting older, so she came up with a plan to provide for Ruth when she was gone. She suggested that Ruth sneak into Boaz's bedroom while he was sleeping, uncover his feet, and ask him to take care of her. Ruth took Naomi's advice. She uncovered Boaz's feet and laid down next to him. In the middle of the night, Boaz woke up startled. Ruth asked him to care for and protect her. Boaz said he needed to first buy the land she lived on so that he would have the right to marry her. So Boaz brought together the decision makers of his town and asked for permission to buy the land. The leaders gave Boaz permission and prayed that God would help Ruth be a great wife. They were married and had a son named Obed, who would soon become the grandfather of one of the greatest leaders Israel had ever known.
Guys, do you remember asking her out that first date? You put yourself out there, and now she can reject you or accept you. And you hold your breath until she says yes. What relief, what excitement, what anticipation. It is good to be accepted. We all want to be accepted. Delaney, we're going through the whole process, and some of you are too, of applying to colleges, and she has been finally accepted. IU isn't one of the 3 universities that have accepted her so far, but it's the only one I can find a graphic for. So there you go. I'm sure some of you have seen this because you go to IU now. But you are accepted is powerful words. To know that somebody accepts you, that somebody wants you, that you've measured up to their standards. But of course, being accepted to college comes with a cost. We also have to pay for tuition and books and room and board and flight school. And so yeah, it's cool to be accepted, and yet it's going to cost a lot. In the story today, we discover a woman who found out that she was accepted, and it cost a high price. It's the story of Ruth, and it's found in a book in the Bible called Ruth. All right, conveniently. So if you have your Bibles, you might look there. We're going to read the first few verses again. I just did on the video, but I'd like to emphasize a few things here. In the days when the judges ruled, there was a famine in the land, so a man from Bethlehem in Judah, together with his wife and 2 sons, went to live for a while in the country of Moab. The man's name was Elimelech, his wife was Naomi, the names of his 2 sons were Mahlon and Chilion, and they were Ephrathites from Bethlehem, Judah. And they went to Moab and lived there. All right, so setting for you, Ruth takes place during the time of the judges. Last week we talked about the judges. It's probably within about the first 50 or 80 years after the Israelites settled in the Promised Land. After they conquered everything and just divvied up the land and settled, probably within that first period, those first few judges is when this happened. We talked about judges last week, that people would do what seemed right in their own eyes. And usually that was something that was evil in the eyes of God. That's what these guys did too. Well, God would then allow the people to be oppressed by another nation until they repented and cried out for help. Then God would send a judge and deliver them from the oppressor. And we know how all that works. But the story of Ruth probably takes place primarily in Bethlehem of Judah, which is about 6 miles south of Jerusalem. So I drew a big black arrow there so you can see where that is. All right, it's about 6 miles south of Jerusalem, in the country, obviously, again, of Judah. And there was a famine in the land. There was a famine in the promised land. The land that was flowing with milk and honey. So I think it's fair to assume that this was a time when the Israelites had forgotten God and weren't obeying God. Because God had promised that if they obeyed Him, they would bless. He would bless them. And the land would be prosperous. But if they disobeyed Him, He would curse them. And the land wouldn't bring forth its fruit anymore. Here they're in a famine. So I'm guessing curse period, right? So it's fair to assume? All right. So Elimelech then shows his lack of faith in God by moving his wife and sons to Moab, on the other side of the Dead Sea. So there's another line over there to show you where the Moabites lived. And so he walked around the Red Sea, over to the other side where the Moabites lived, among a foreign country who didn't follow God. This was not where God intended them to live. And even though he thought it was the right thing to do in his own eyes, it made sense. Let's get out of the famine and go find food. It did not save his family. In verse 3, it says, Now Elimelech, Naomi's husband, died, and she was left with 2 sons. They married Moabite women, which they weren't supposed to do. One named Orpah, and the other named Ruth. And after they lived there about 10 years, both Mahlon and Chilion also died, and Naomi was left without her 2 sons and her husband. So Elimelech died. The sons Mahlon and Chilion married Moabite women. Oprah said she was named after Orpah, and they just misspelled it. All right, so just so you know, Orpah and Ruth. All right. The Israelites weren't supposed to marry foreign women who worship foreign gods. That's what got Israel into trouble over and over again. And here Elimelech's family did the same thing, marrying out of their faith community. It's not a unique situation, but it is contrary to the will of God. Well, 10 years later, the sons both died, leaving the 3 women widows, apparently not having any children in the process, and so there was no one to carry on the family name. So Naomi was crushed, as you can imagine. And she hears that the famine in Israel is over, so apparently God had sent the deliverer, and she decides it's time to head back to Bethlehem. Well, Orpah and Ruth both want to go with her, but Naomi urges them to stay in their own country of Moab to find another husband, get married, have your own family. You can't go with me. It's just going to be miserable for there. You'll be the foreign girls there. You won't be able to find a husband. You guys will have a worthless life like mine. My life is worthless enough. You don't need to ruin your lives too. Don't go with me. And so Orpah said, you're right, and stay behind. Ruth, however, decided she was going to stay with Naomi and refused to leave her. And here's what she said. And this is kind of special to me because this was our wedding vows. We got this straight out of Ruth, and here's what Ruth said to Naomi. Do not urge me to leave you or to turn back from you. Where you go, I will go. Where you stay, I will stay. Your people will be my people, and your God, my God. Where you die, I will die, and there I will be buried. May the Lord deal with me, be it ever so severely, if anything but death separates you and me. So Ruth goes back to Bethlehem with Naomi. And when they get there, everyone starts talking. Is that Naomi back? Is she really back? And Naomi hears him and she says, don't call me Naomi, call me Mara. Because the Almighty has made my life very bitter. Naomi means pleasant. And she said, don't call me pleasant. Because there's nothing pleasant about my life anymore. Call me bitter. Call me Mara. Because now I'm bitter. Because the Almighty has dealt severely with me. We disobeyed Him. We were bad. Now He's dealt bad with me. And God hates me. We can't get along. So call me bitter. Well, they get back to Bethlehem around harvest season. Naomi has land that belongs to Elimelech. And she can't work it anymore. So she has to sell it. And when she sells the land, she's going to lose her identity. In Israel, the land that a family had settled in when they settled in the Promised Land was always that family's property. They could sell it, but every 50th year was the year of Jubilee. And during the year of Jubilee, all of the land went back to its original owners. So my great-great-great-great-great-great-grandfather settled on this land, and now it's come down to me, and I sell it, and you're going to farm that land or live in that land or whatever you're going to do with that land until the year of Jubilee. When the year of Jubilee hits, you have to give it back to me. So it stays in the family. Even if I sell it off out of the family, it's going to come back. Our family's always going to have that. But Naomi didn't have any heirs. She didn't have anybody to pass on the family name. So when she sold the land, it was not going to come back to her family. The family that bought it would keep it, and it would become their inheritance. And Naomi's family would be no more. So now Naomi and Ruth have no family, no assets, no family farm to have as an income. But the law that God had given Israel did make provision to care for the poor. It was called gleaning. And it worked like this. When a farmer went out and harvested, whatever scraps they missed as they went through the field, they couldn't go back and get it. They had to just leave it. And then the scraps were available to the poor people who could come in behind the harvesters and pick up whatever they missed. So you knock it all down, you reach down, you gather it up, you throw it in your thing, whatever you didn't gather up, you just leave there. Or if your scythe or whatever you were cutting with misses a couple stalks, you just leave those there. And then the poor could come through and pick those, and that's what they got to live on. It's called gleaning. And Ruth goes out to glean for her and Naomi to have food, and she goes to the field, as it turns out, of a distant relative of Elimelech's named Boaz. So Boaz asks about her, who's this girl out here in my field gleaning? And they tell her, well, she's a Moabite, a foreign woman, and he gets to know about her. But here's the deal. She was a Moabite, and they all knew it. And the Moabites and the Israelites didn't get along well. Moab was a country at odds with Israel. In Judges chapter 3, we read about a fat king of Moab, King Eglon, who captured Jericho, or what was left of Jericho, and subjected the people of Israel for 18 years. He ruled over them. And so Israel and Moab did not get along. They were enemies. And Ruth is a Moabite, living in Israel, living with the enemy. So Boaz had every reason to tell her to get out of his field. She wasn't an Israelite. She wasn't under the law. She wasn't provided for in the law. But Ruth was a hard worker, and Boaz noticed. And Boaz had heard how she had cared for Naomi, how she had left her foreign country and come back to live among the Israelites, even though she knew she would be the foreigner and the odd one there. And so he had respect for her and asked her to stay and to work for him. And in fact, he even asked her to join them for the mealtime in the evening, to sit at his table. See, Boaz accepted Ruth, even though Ruth was a foreigner, and not just a foreigner, but a foreigner from a rival country. Well, Ruth goes back and tells Naomi all about Boaz and how he had accepted her, and how things were well. And Naomi knows Boaz. I've heard that name. And so she says in Ruth 2:20, the Lord bless him. He has not stopped showing his kindness to the living and the dead. That man's our close relative. He's one of our guardian redeemers. Now, guardian redeemer was something that's provided for in the law. Basically, if a man died without an heir, the next of kin was to marry his widow. And he would love her and pay off her debts and buy back the land if she had to sell it. And if they have a child, his land will go to that child in the name of the deceased man. So I pick up, you die, I pick up the slack, I come in and marry your widow to preserve your name. And if me and your widow, because we're now married, have a child, that child inherits everything in your name. So I get nothing. It was a risk for people to do this. It would cost them something. To carry on the name of a deceased man meant to give up a lot of your own rights and your own privileges. So it was a huge ask of a guardian redeemer, jeopardizing their own financial estate, having to pay to buy back the land for somebody else's benefit. But that was a role Boaz could have taken on. So Naomi had Ruth get all dolled up and go to Boaz after he goes to bed and uncover his feet and lie down, which sounds goofy. But here's what it was. It was a very overt marriage proposal. She was offering herself to Boaz. She's putting herself in a position of possible rejection. She's laying it all on the line, literally. Laying down at his feet is basically saying, I want to be your wife. And so she is asking a prominent Israelite to marry a foreign woman in somebody else's name. Now, the Israelites were supposed to marry foreign women. However, this foreign woman is now a follower of God, of Yahweh. She forsook her foreign gods and pledged her allegiance to the God of Israel. She told Naomi, your God will be my God. I'm going to go and worship your God now. I'm going to follow your God now. So this doesn't present the problem that God was trying to prevent when He told them not to marry foreign women, that they would chase after foreign gods. This woman was a follower of Jehovah God, of Yahweh. And so it didn't have that same stipulation to it. But it was still a huge risk that she took, asking an Israelite to marry a foreign woman. And once again, Boaz accepted her. But there was an issue. There was a closer relative to Elimelech than Boaz. And that closer relative had first dibs on being the guardian redeemer. And consequently of marrying Ruth. So Boaz went to him and gave him the opportunity to be the guardian redeemer. The man was afraid of endangering his own estate, so he let Boaz redeem Naomi's estate. So now, Boaz buys the property of Elimelech and of Chilion and of Mahlon, and in the process acquires Ruth, Mahlon's widow, as his wife, risking his own inheritance in marrying Ruth. It cost him. He did it. So the book of Ruth starts with 3 funerals and ends with a wedding. Boaz and Ruth are married and they have a baby boy, and they name him Obed. Obed means worker. They now have an heir who can work the fields and preserve the name of Mahlon and Elimelech. And Obed grew up and had a son named him Jesse. And Jesse had a son named him David, King David. He didn't name him King David, but you know him as King David. And several generations later, Jesus Christ would be born in Bethlehem because Joseph had to go back to Bethlehem for a census because Joseph was from the house and line of David. So we esteem Boaz, that he would accept Ruth, even at a great cost to himself. So why would he do that? Why would Boaz risk everything and take in Ruth? I think it's because he knew what it was like to be an outsider. Do you know who his mother was? In the genealogy of Jesus, in the book of Matthew, in chapter 1, we find out Boaz, whose mother was Rahab. And Boaz was the father of Obed, whose mother was Ruth. Obed the father of Jesse, and Jesse the father of King David. Boaz's mother was Rahab. You remember the prostitute from Jericho who hid the spies when they were spying out the city? And who the Israelites spared when they destroyed the city? And she came and lived among the Israelites and married a man in Israel? We knew that from Joshua. Well, we didn't know was the guy's name. And now we know it was Solomon. Rahab was accepted by the Israelites because she was faithful to God and they spied out the land. And because of that, she was accepted into their family and married into their family. And her son Boaz accepted a foreign girl named Ruth and welcomed her into the family. And all of them, both foreign women, Rahab and Ruth, are in the lineage of Jesus Christ. Well, that's the lower story. Let's look at the upper story, what's going on here. All of this led us to, or shows us in the lineage of Christ, the one that everything is leading to. Jesus paid a high price for us. We too can say, I'm accepted, because Jesus died for us. Jesus was the ultimate guardian redeemer. We were slaves to sin. We were outsiders, foreigners. We'd lost our inheritance because of Adam. And then Jesus comes along and redeems us at a high price, his own life. And just like Ruth became the bride of Boaz, so we become the bride of Christ. So there's a lot of lonely people in our community today who feel like outsiders. Nobody cares anymore. Maybe they've lost some loved ones and now they feel abandoned. Or maybe their families turned their back on them. Or maybe they're new to the community and they just don't know anybody yet and they don't feel like they belong. They want to feel accepted, but they're outsiders and they feel like they have no hope. Sometimes we feel that way towards the church too. But here's a group of people that have it all together. Their lives are perfect. And I'm all messed up. And I can't associate with people like that. They'll just judge me. They'll just treat me poorly. They'll look down at me. They'll disassociate with me. So I don't want to get to know them. God calls us to be agents of acceptance on his behalf. Will you, will I, be Boaz to the world out there that is kind of Ruthish? They don't know where they belong. So how can we do that? How can we be agents of acceptance in someone else's life? How can we be a Boaz to somebody else? Here's a few ideas, and I throw these out there just to get you thinking. Please don't think you need to do any or all of these, but you need to do something. And maybe this will plant a seed in your mind of something you can do to accept somebody who feels like an outsider. All right, so some examples. Maybe you can volunteer as a mentor at like a halfway house. Love Inc. does some things, Love the Name of Christ out of Greenfield, where you can be a mentor to somebody who's gone through financial difficulties or feels kind of left out in our culture. Or you can work with something like the Landing. The Rocky group went over there, and it's a place where high school kids go and kind of celebrate recovery. It's kind of like a Christian version of AA for kids, for high school kids. Or you can work with Celebrate Recovery. We have a praise team that goes over and works with them once a month or twice a month over in Greensburg. Dealing with people who have addictions and feel like culture has kicked them out because they're sick, they have a disease, they're good. And they feel left out and behind and lost, and they need somebody that will come and just accept them and care for them. Or you might volunteer in our children's ministry here. Kids that feel like, well, those are the adults and we're the kids and we can't really get along, and they need to know that you care about them. And so you can be a teacher in our junior church program, or if you can't teach, at least be there for crowd control and just love on the kids and let them know you care about them. Or mentor a teen. Find a teenager, help them in their walk with Christ, just to overcome some of the other temptations that are out there. Pray with them, study the Bible with them, hold them accountable. Tell them about what life was like when you were that age, and how you've overcome some of those struggles, and how things have worked out for you, and how God has helped you through many difficult times, and how God helped guide your career decisions and your family decisions. And let them know that it's not just a free-for-all out there. Would you be willing to mentor a team? Or you can go on a short-term mission trip. We have little trips that we do a little around here. We're hoping, not firm yet, we're hoping to go back to the Dominican Republic next summer. Maybe you'd like to go with us. We're going to go for a week. We do VBS programs there where we go around to churches and just do what we do during Vacation Bible School. We teach the kids, we play games with them, we have some snacks. If you're able to, you can be a teacher and then teach adults as well. We went and worked with the prison ministry while we were there, where we got to go play basketball with some criminals that are going to be in jail for a long time, and just need to know that they're not forgotten. So there's lots of opportunities in that. We also do some short-term trips like that around here. We are going to take the group up again sometime to Noblesville to work with the International Disaster Emergency Services, just building buildings and putting together food packets that they can take into places that have been ripped apart by disaster, floods, hurricanes, tornadoes, whatever, and they'll go in and help them resettle. But get involved in something to help somebody else. Or maybe you'd rather do something a little closer to home, will even do a chore or a project for a single mom or a widow or somebody who's alone now. And help them clean up their house or clean out their leaves or rake their yard. Invite a single parent and their family, their kids, over for some relaxation. Or even take them with you when you go on vacation. Because odds are they're probably not going too far. Or just speak encouragement to a person who's struggling. You hear them complaining, you hear them whining about something. Would you just take a few moments to sit down with them and encourage them, maybe pray with them? Invite a widow over for dinner. Instead of eating all by herself in her lonely house where the walls just seem so far apart and there's so much space and they feel so alone, invite them over to share a meal with you. Or have your family or a group of friends go to a nursing home and visit those who are alone and don't have any family. And celebrate their special days with them. You know, go over there for their birthday. Celebrate Christmas with them. Do the things that a family would normally do, but their family's no longer around to do it with them. Or sit with a new kid in school. Or the kid that never gets anybody else to come sit with them. Or maybe at work, you see the guy that always feels like he doesn't fit in. He's always kind of over on his own table. See, we need to align our life to the upper story of God, even if it means surrender and sacrifice on our part, in order to accept someone who needs to know they belong. Will you be Boaz to somebody out there that needs to know, hey, you're accepted? God, would you help us to show that kind of compassion, that kind of concern and care? Father, I thank you for Boaz and for his faithfulness and understanding what that's like in his own life. And Father, there have been things we've been through too that allow us a different perspective on people that are going through tough times. We have addictions, and we'd like to deal with people who have addictions. Or we made stupid decisions in our life, and we can help people who are in the midst of suffering from those same stupid decisions, and we can give them hope. Or Father, we've done well, and we can help other people make wiser choices and let them know there are alternative ways of doing things, that we don't have to chase after the things the world chases after. We don't have to give into and fall to the temptations that everybody gives into and fall prey to. Father, we can just be a companion to somebody who has lost all their family and who feels alone and abandoned in the world. Whatever it is, Father, that we've been through that we can help other people with, or whatever we haven't been through that we can help people get through, would you help us to see those needs around us? And instead of wishing that somebody would do something, would you help us make our heart break? Help us to feel some kind of sympathy. Help us to want to help them. Just encourage them to know that they belong and that they're accepted. That they're not the outcast, that they're not worthless, that their life is not over. In the process, Father, would you help us to love them with the love that you give us? That as we love you with all of our heart, soul, mind, and strength, you fill us with enough love to share with our neighbors, to love our neighbor as ourselves. And that we can love them in your name and let them know there's a God who loves them more than even we can. So work through us. We pray in Christ's name.